Good morning. We're in Perek Nun Dalid 54 in Sefer Yeshayahu, and a very famous Perek in the sense that the entire Perek, plus a few more psukim, is the Haftorah for Parshas Noach. And the reason why is because you'll see later in the Perek, we refer to the promise of May Noach. We refer to the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had promised he would never again destroy the earth, which really isn't as explicit in the text in Sefer Breshit as we would like it to be, but it's an understood promise. And so therefore, we read this parak from Yeshayahu at that time. Now, what's beautiful about this parak is some of the imagery. And the imagery itself surrounds itself around four different typologies of women. The barren woman, the akara with which it begins, the nam, the widow with which it continues, the atsuva, the one who is forlorn and abandoned ultimately, and the oniyah, and the one who's just poor, lacking everything. Now, each one of these four have different attributes to them, and each one of the four the Navi responds to in a different way. Now, in terms of what is the imagery referring to, so it could be either Yerushalayim, that's that the widowed or the barren woman is referring to Yerushalayim, or it could be the Jewish people, and we can carry that comparison throughout. But in each one of them, what we're seeing is the Akara has no children at all, is alone. The Almanam is a woman who once had a husband and has now lost the husband, which is considered by the Meforshim as one step worse because she knew something. She knew what that would be, what companionship would be. The Atzuvan Azuvam is a woman who was abandoned by her husband. And so the husband is still alive somewhere, but he's disappeared on her, which is even worse because there's no sense of closure. That's the word I was looking for. And the Oniyah is just a woman who is, she's referred to as the Oniyah Hasara. Sora. She is the woman who is like in the midst of a storm, going back and forth, not knowing where to go, which Rav Beni Lau, who does a lot of work on Tanakh. He founded the 929 website and has done a tremendous amount of writing on Tanakh. He says it's one of the things that comes right at the time of the promise of Noach, that this will never happen again. He said the Oniyah Sa'orah is reminding us of the bird that was sent out, of the Onah, which was not able to find Manoach before the land was fully dry. It couldn't find a place to rest. And so this impoverished woman who is constantly moving around and not finding her place in the world, that woman is reminding us of just like the bird who couldn't find any place to land. Each one of those has a response. Each one of those is going to be how this parak is structured. Now, once we get past there and talk about all those impoverished people, or in this case, Yerushalayim that is by itself, or the Jewish people that has been in the Galut, we then come to the magnificent promises of the redemption itself, and it has psukim that we're very familiar with. So we'll start with the first piece, and the first piece is right at the beginning of the parak, Roni akara lo yalada. Okay, Roni means to sing. Sing, O barren one, the one who has never given birth. Now, the barren one never given birth, Beni Lau talks about the fact that it's not just that she doesn't have children, but she's already knows that she can't give birth. It's something like she's given up all hope on everything. And this is if it's talking about Yerushalayim, in that kind of sense, Yerushalayim has been destroyed. There is nothing there. And therefore, it looks like a woman without anything. On the other hand, the Ibn Ezra says it's talking about the Knesset Yisrael, the congregation of Jews. The congregation in Jews, in this sense, the Knesset is a feminine form as well, and it could be there. Then he continues, Pitzchirina burst out in song, Vitzahali, and shout joyfully, Lochala. Okay, you've never ever been, you woman who's never ever been able to even be in labor. As Rashi talks about, the lochala is talking about the chalchalei, it's talking about the chevleim leda. You've never been in. Now, why should you be singing? This sounds like a pretty miserable state, the barren woman. Why should be singing? Ki rabim b'nei shomema mi b'nei be'ula, Amar Hashem. Because ultimately, the children of those who were desolate will be greater than those who had a husband, than those who were able to have children. In other words, the Radak says, even though Yerushalayim has been empty all of these years, it was desolate, it had been destroyed, ultimately, the rest of the nations of the world thought that they had these great cities. Yerushalayim is going to surpass it. It will have a greater population, greater built than ever before. Reb Moshe Ibn Jaktila, who the Ibn Ezra refers to as Reb Moshe HaKohen, says this isn't just talking about the nations in general, it's talking about Bavel. That the Navi is sitting in Babylonia, and the Navi sees all of these things that's happening with the Galut, because the Jews are out in exile in the Galut. The Navi says what's happening here in Bavel, the great Babylonia, and all of the great centers of culture, when you're looking opposite the destruction of Yerushalayim, it looks like there's no hope. That's going to be bigger and better than ever was there. Interestingly, the word Be'ula, which means one with a husband, we also talk about Bavel as an Eretz Be'ula. Why? Because Bavel was a land, it was Mesopotamia. It was a land that always had the water. And so it could be a play on the word. It was a Baal, but the Ibn Ezra says Be'ula actually means, in this kind of case, it's a Melech. It's talking about we had our society had been destroyed. Our polity didn't exist in a normal fashion any longer because of the Galut. We think it's all over. Those people have governments. Those people have kings. We're going to be better than them. Not only are we going to be better, Yerushalayim, harchivi mekomo alech. Begin to expand your tents. Make room because of all of the children, the Radak says, who are going to come back. V'yiriot mishkenotayich, and also the tarps, the skins of your setting, of the place you're living. The Radak says, Oalayich is Yerushalayim, Mishkenotayich is talking about the rest of the land of Israel. Get ready for this massive influx of people. Yatu al tachshochi. He said, tachsochi, go ahead and begin to expand this, stretch the tent. Don't hold back. Ha'arichi meitarayich. Go ahead and lengthen the ropes on the side of a tent. Make them longer so you have more space. V'yatedotayich chazeki, and strengthen the stakes into the ground. What's happening here? The Navi is making a promise, and the Navi's promise that he's saying is that so many people are going to come back, the industry of absorption is going to be overwhelmed entirely. They're going to start coming back. You better have all the space for them. Benny Lau in this piece says this is very much like the story, if you remember, the story of the woman who in Malachim Bet, who was going to lose everything she had, and she went to Elisha, and Elisha said, get all of the utensils you can to fill with oil. Now, the interesting thing there, he points out, is she gets as many utensils as she can. She says, I got everything I can. And then all of the utensils are filled with oil. He suggests that had she got more utensils would have been filled. It was a test of her faith in the word of the Navi there. A test of her faith that she could have had endless amounts. In this case, he suggests, this is also a test of the Jewish people. The Navi is saying, trust me, what you think is impossible is going to happen. And because it's going to happen, get ready for it to happen. And the more you get ready, al tachsochi, don't hold back. The more you get ready for it, the more likely everything will occur. And so it's a test of their faith, ki yamin usmol tifrotzi, because the Jewish people are going to expand, or this is the land of Israel, is going to expand to the right and to the left. Now, interestingly, the right and left are which directions? It depends which way you're facing. Okay. If I'm facing north, right and left are east and west. Now, there is a little bit of a problem talking about the boundaries of the land of Israel extending east and west. And that is because west, there's a sea. We have a little bit of a problem. It's lahavdil like in Chicago. If someone says they live on the east side of Chicago, you want to find out if they are in the lake or at the bottom of the lake. Okay, we have a west side, right? If they live on the east in Eretz Yisrael, so it's interesting.
It could be like Avraham Avinu, who said to Lot, the right and left was north and south.
Right.
So that
And that, in
was
fact, the Medrash says right and left. Now, it makes sense to say right and left because where are the Jews situated? They're situated in Bavel. They're situated in the Galut. So when they're looking, they're facing west or we're facing east. We're facing that direction. If I'm facing west, if I'm in Bavel when this prophecy is happening, and this is the ultimate prophecy. So let's say I'm in the west. I'm looking right and left. It's north and south. And that's the directions in which you have small tifrot. So you're going to burst on both those sides. V'zarech goyim yirash. And your offspring are going to ultimately inherit the lands of the non-Jewish people. The Goyim, they'll inherit the lands of the non-Jews. The Radak says, by the way, here, the Zarech Goyim Yirash, this is talking about east and west. The non-Jews, the Plishtim, the Edom, Moab, on both sides of Eretz Yisrael, they're going to inherit that. The Malbim says that ultimately, because there are going to be so many Jews who are going to be returning to Eretz Yisrael, and Yerushalayim will not be able to hold on to them. There's just too many. Therefore, they're going to start settling in other cities, in the cities of the non-Jews. They're going to settle. Varim neshamot yoshivu. And because even those cities won't be able to hold on to all of the Jews, the desolate cities, neshamot in this kind of case is not a neshama, but from the word shomema. Okay, then even those cities that have been destroyed are going to be rebuilt. Now, just think about our time nowadays in terms of real estate prices in Yerushalayim, the way people are moving all over Eretz Yisrael, the way they're rebuilding cities that had once existed and had been destroyed. This is the first part. Okay, the first part talks about ultimately the akara, the barren one. Now we get to the second part. The second part is al tir'i kilo tevoshi. Don't be afraid, because you will not be ashamed, and you're not going to be embarrassed. The difference the Malbim says between busha and chlima, they're both, I'm just out of curiosity, how does our scroll translate, don't be afraid? How does he translate that piece? At the beginning, just read for me the beginning of verse 4. Humiliated, shamed and humiliated. Basically, they sound like synonyms. But Lashon HaKodesh doesn't have absolute synonyms. And so the Malbim says, Busham, that is internal. A person who's ashamed for himself. For something he did, I feel bad about what I did. Chlima is how others shame me. So it's out the external. Don't be ashamed of anything. Kilo tachpiri, because ultimately you're not going to be humiliated. Now, the Radak says, what kind of fear and what kind of shame are we talking about? So the Radak says, listen, don't be afraid when you're going out from your galut, because when you come back there to Israel this time, it's not going to be like all the others. You're never going to be exiled again. This is an eternal, and therefore you're never going to be lowered from your point of greatness. Kivoshet alumayach tishkachi, because ultimately, you're going to forget the shame of your youth, v'cherpat almanotayich lo tizkeri od, and also the embarrassment of your widowhood you will not remember as well. What's good? Okay, interest. Okay, cherpa is humiliation. Bushan chlima, the way I've been translating it, is ashamed and embarrassment. Interestingly, what does it mean? First of all, what are these two stages? Disgrace? Yeah, okay, yeah. If you have these different stages, so you have an aluma, which is a na'ara, a young woman, and you also have the almana, you have the widow. Where is that talking about? So Rav Schwab says The Na'ara, this Aluma, that's talking about the embarrassment you had before you were exiled, when you were still in the land of Israel, and yet you were under the control of other nations, versus. In fact, he even talks about it when the Aseret Shvatim, when the 10 tribes were still with us in the northern portion of the land, versus the Almanah when we've lost it all and we're out in Galut. Rav Laut says about the fact is that an aluma, this woman, is even more isolated than an akara. Why? Because an akara, barren woman, well, she found a companion in life. She's married. But an aluma is a woman who's never had any partner in life. And so we're talking about this first stage and second stage. Huh? An aluma. No, that's an almana. Aluma, ayin, lamid, vav, mem, hey, is the same thing as a na'ara, is a young woman. Okay, she's further off, and almana is one who is lost. So that kind of said, the Shadal goes a step further than the Radak. He says, listen, Aluma is before the Galut. Almana is after the Galut. Before the Galut, we were under the control of others. After the Galut, we'd lost it all. So one is before we didn't have what we needed, and the other is we lost what we once had. And that's the concept of the two. And how are you going to forget it, though? How are you not going to remember it anymore? And so the Radak says that ultimately, all of the tzaras that we had in all of the years of exile are going to be eclipsed by all of the goodness we'll have at the time of redemption. And there's all sorts of discussions in Chazal of the length of these kinds of things, and it goes back and forth. But we just say what's going to be so, so good for all of us is going to make us forget all of the bad. And that's the promise that he's providing for us. Ki bo alayich osayich, because your master is the one who created you. Now, bo alayich is a strange word. Bo alayich really should be ba'alech, your master. And in fact, probably the reason why it's in this form bo alayich is because of the word osayich. So there's a poetry to the two words, bo alayich, osayich. There's a rhyme to it exists. It's also, according to the Radak, whenever you deal with a plural reference to God, like the word Elohim, it's an element of kavod. So we're extending this great honor to your master. Your master, in this kind of case, and that is a plural form, he's the one who created you. You're not going to be, okay? You're not going to be by yourself anymore, because the God who created you, he is that one. He is Hashem Tzvakot Shemo. He's the God of hosts. Now notice, Tzvakot, and I haven't seen this anywhere, but it struck me that when we refer to God by Tzvakot, we're talking like the armies, the hosts of God. Okay? Tzivos Hashem is, by Chabad, the youth group. By the Tzvakot, whenever we talk to God that way, the Almanah was all by herself. And now comes God with the hosts, the God who's like encompassing, all encompassing, not as an individual, but as a God with all of this power around him as well. Vigoalech, and the one who is going to redeem you, okay, is the Kedosh Yisrael. Now, a Goel, a redeemer, if you remember in Tanakh, Boaz was the Goel, or Ploni Almoni was the Goel for Ruth. He was the redeemer. A Goel is a person, and the Dat Mikra talks about, is someone who's close to you. So the one who is close to you to redeem you is the Kedosh Yisrael, is the sanctity of the Jewish people, Elokei Chol Haaretz Yikarei. He will be called, and this I'm following the Radak's approach, he will be called the God of the entire earth. Think about the end of Aleinu, Yakiru v'yedu kol yoshvei tevel, that all of the people of the earth will recognize God. So this lonely person is going to be saved, is going to be taken by her master, God of hosts, and is going to be redeemed with the closeness of the Kedosh Yisrael, who the rest of the nations of the world is going to recognize. Third scene, or the third imagery, Ki isha azuva v'atzuvat ruach kra'ach Hashem, because you're like a woman who was abandoned and was depressed in spirit, and Hashem has called unto you. This is, in this case, the most significant the harshest, in a sense, of all of the descriptions. A person who's been totally abandoned. It's a person who's an aguna, a woman who doesn't know what her future is going to be. She had something, she lost it, but she can't recreate or restart again because she's been abandoned. And this word ki, it's not because the key is coming specifically just to strengthen. You'll see there's a whole series. Ki vo'alayach ki sha. You'll see the word ki keeps on appearing in this parak. Ki is like an emphasis. L'chizuku li'imut is just saying this is the reality. For it's the in Aramaic sometimes you have I teach this to my kids all the time. You have, if you've ever heard the phrase in Aramaic kamash malan or kasal kedaitach, there's a kuf that is a prefix. That kuf is a prefix, or a separate word as a kuf aleph. It doesn't translate. It's called the emphatic kuf. It's the equivalent of an exclamation mark. It's just coming to strengthen something. So if I have kamashmalan is exactly the same as the word mashmalan. It's just kamashmalan is like, boom. The key here is coming to push this. Keisha azuvav atzuvat ruach hakodesh baruch hu, okay, has called unto you because you were like an abandoned woman. Now, what does the abandonment refer to? God abandoned us. He never fully abandoned us. And yet, because of our sins, as the Malbim points out, we feel lost. Ve'eshet nurim kitim asamar lokayach. Now, in this, and can the wife of youth be despised, said God. The Shadal says this should be read bitmiya. This should be read as a rhetorical question. Can the wife of one's youth ever be despised, says God? In other words, even though the husband of this woman has abandoned her, there's never a permanent abandonment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be able to come back. Now, he claims, the Shadal understands the Radak to have said the same thing. The Radak says, V'alo et eshet nurim, v'lo yim'aso taba ala le'olam. Isn't she an eshet nurim? Isn't she the wife of one's youth? And will never be despised permanently by her husband. I hear how he says it. I'm not sure that he is saying it in the same bitmiyah, with the same rhetorical question that the Shadal applies to it, but that does come from the Radak as well. And now comes HaKadosh Baruch Hu's explanation. Berega katon azavtich. If for just a brief period of time, I have left you. Now, the bet in Berega is kind of complicated, what that bet means. In a moment. It should have just been for a moment, and bet doesn't normally work that way. Okay, and so the Radak rereads it as if there's missing words in the pasuk. It says, "Bayamim shazavtichotam." During the days that I left, those are just like a moment. But very simply, I've left you for a moment. Uvarachamim gedolim akabtzech, but I will, in great mercy, gather you in. Rachamim also means, and we saw this early in Yeshayahu and Memtet Tetvav, when we had the phrase Rachamim Gedolim, great mercy, it actually also can mean love. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling this abandoned woman HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling either the Jewish people or Yerushalayim in particular, he says, the period of your exile is going to appear like just a moment, and I'm going to gather you in because I love you. Okay, it's a long moment. Okay, but it's going to appear just like a moment. And in fact, to emphasize this even further, and this is the Radak says the next pasuk basically means the exact same thing, but brings it about a second time to strengthen the point. B'shetzef ketzef histarti panai rega mimech. With a shetzef of wrath, I have hidden my face from you for a moment. Now, how does ArtScroll translate verse 8? With what? A slight. A slight wrath? Okay. Everyone's got slight wrath? Barry, how's Mam Lois? How does he do it?
In a burst of anger.
Perfect. Those are the two explanations. So the Targum,
Ketzef is huge. It's like foaming at the mouth.
Yeah, but the problem is shetzef. Shetzef is a word that is unique in Tanakh. We don't know what shetzef is. And so ketzef, we know, is wrath, is anger. It's real anger. But the Targum Yonatan, within context, says shetzef means, he translates it berega zair, for a small moment. That, in fact, is the way Rashi follows, and Rashi says, Kamo berega katon. He says it's parallel to the opening of the previous pasuk. Shetzef and katon must be synonyms. Fine. However, and the Ibn Ezra says the same thing from he says ein re'alo, there's no other word like this in Tanakh. He says it must mean ma'at, but Rashi also brings a second explanation, which is really first in Rashi. Okay, he brings the explanation of Menachem ibn Saruk. Menachem ibn Saruk is a 10th century Spanish philologist. I think I got it right. I think is what he said. Yeah, a person who wrote a dictionary. Okay, grammarian. No, he actually wrote a dictionary. Okay, and interestingly, in his dictionary, he says it's b'choriaf, with great anger. With Barry, what did you say again? A burst of anger. Okay, and in fact, the Dat Mikras suggests that maybe shetzef, this unique word, is a corollary to the word shetef, shtifa, to like a flow, to wash away, like a torrent. Okay, he says sometimes tzadi and tet do switch places, and that would mean then the shetef ketzef, like with a torrent of wrath, with extraordinary anger would happen. Okay, b'shetz of ketzef, he's starti panai. This is hester panim. We talk about when our perception, when bad things happen to the Jewish people, the perception we have of it is hester panim, is that God has hidden his face from us. We believe that everything is from God and that God is in control. It's not like God, this is a non-Orthodox, a non-Jewish approach, saying, well, sometimes God turns away and let happen whatever is going to happen. We don't, the vast majority of Chazal, overwhelming, doesn't accept that approach. And so, but for us, it looks like hester panim, like we don't see what's going on. We can't understand God. Rega mimech, uvechesed olam richamtich. But God then turns around and he says, but wait a second, that extraordinary anger, the entire exile and all of the tragedies that occurred, that's a moment. But the chesed you're going to receive, that chesed is going to be a chesed olam. It's an eternal chesed richamtich, which I have given you mercifully. Amar goalech Hashem, said your Redeemer Hashem. Remember, it's the second time we have God referring to himself as a goel. Okay, he had the goel in a couple of psukim ago. Goel is a relationship. Now, we have these 4 different prototypes of women representing Yerushalayim in various stages of abandonment, of hopelessness. And in each one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns around and says, it's going to be better than you ever imagined. You'll forget all these terrible things that happened. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a promise to us. Ki meinoach zot li. Because just as the Menoach was to me, just as the story of the flood was for me, asher nishpati me'avor Menoach od al haaretz, that I promised, never again will there be a flood over the land. Ken nishpati miksof alayich umigarbach. I am also making a promise now that you will never have this kind of anger or wrath against you again. God said that this will be the Geulah that you will experience, will be the eternal Geulah. So from this perspective, right here, you see this parak is not talking about the Babylonian Jews coming back to build the second Beit HaMikdash. It's very clear that this is talking about the ultimate Geulah, because we still are in exile and we still are suffering. Okay, just last night, I don't know if you read about the marches in Montreal. that took place, okay? And it was neo-Nazi statements in Montreal and all sorts of things that are happening in the world and continue to happen. The murder of the Chabad Shliach in the UAE yesterday, okay? All of these terrible things are still happening. So I can't refer to this as talking about now. Obviously, it can't be Bavel, because after Bavel, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed again. Okay, it's a terrible thing that's going on. Ki harim yamushu, because mountains move, ugvaot temutena, and hills shake. Now there are two ways of explaining this: pshat and drash. So the drash everyone loves very much because Rashi brings the drash. Okay, and he says the mountains are the patriarchs, the hills are the matriarchs, that even if the zchut, the merit of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, even if that merit disappears, has been used up in total, we're still going to have this covenant. We'll get the rest of the pasuk in a minute, okay? Or the Radak actually says in his second explanation, this is talking not about the nations of the world, the mountains and the hills are talking about nations of the world. Even they, something can happen to them. But the pshat is that the word ki would be more, probably a better translation would be even. Okay, afilu. And this is all meant, as the Shadal says, that yitachen sheyezeh mishiyezeh. Okay, it's more likely that mountains will move and hills will shake, versus my chesed, my grace ever moving, or my covenant with you ever shaking. In other words, you want to talk about how permanent my promise to you that there will never be a galut again? It's the mountains will move more is more likely than my covenant disappearing for you. Again. No, so this is why this entire chapter is talking about the future, which hasn't happened yet. This
future was the destruction of the
Jerusalem. So Yeshayahu in this chapter is talking about our time. In our time. He's not talking, this is how we know it. We know it because God would have promised, if God promises eternal love, eternal protection, eternal goodness, we haven't had that eternal goodness. It can't possibly be talking about Bavel. About the second the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash going into the second. It has to be our time. We'll see it in a minute also where we talk about both. Yeah.
In this time that Yeshayahu was speaking, there hasn't even been a destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
So he's seeing something that hasn't happened even the first time.
Right. This is early on. This is, remember, he's right. Chizkiyahu's time, he's a few kings before any real trouble happens. He's right at the time, he's centered, even though he goes, remember, Yeshayahu served for many, many years. He's centered around the time of the exile of the 10 tribes from the north. So around the 8th century BCE is where he's at. Continuing.
Yeshayahu also refers to, he draws in the reference to Shamayim va'aretz and the Harim regularly, sort of like Moshe Rabbeinu, Shimu Shamayim va'azini eretz, that Hashem diber. So it's that eternality that he refers to a lot about the Brit.
100%. And that's why, he's talking about something that's never going to move. Okay. It's never going to happen. Well, even if it did happen, that which will never happen, even so, my Brit will still be there. God, the one who loves you, or God is the one who has mercy over you. Now comes this last part. Okay? You were a poor, so I actually like the translation I saw, I think Rav Schwab says, storm-tossed woman who was uncomforted. This is, you just can't find your place. Poor. Well, but also, but not just that, no, because we have v'nitem et nafshotechem, right? Suffering. Okay. Yeah. When he asks Oralo Nuchama, Hine Anochi, Marbit Befuch, and this is going to be Puch, I'm going to beat with Puch Avanayach. I'm going to pave with puch your stones, v'sadtich b'sapirim, and the foundations will be with sapirim. God is saying, you, the storm-tossed one, you, the person who can't find her place, let me just tell you about your place. Your place is going to be a palace that's going to be unparalleled because of the magnificence of the palace. How do we see it? Well, first of all, we're going to have, the roads are going to be paved with puch. Now, what puch is, I only found 4 different possibilities. Okay, puch is some kind of precious stone. So one, Rashi says it's a carbuncle. A carbuncle is a deep red precious stone. The Ibn Ezra says it's an emerald. The Mitzudat Tzion says it's actually like like an eyeshadow. It's kohl, okay? It's of a blue color. And Shadal says it's a lapis lazuli, Lazuli, which is also blue. I'm going to pave your streets with puch. Your foundations will be with sapphire, sapirim. Not just that, v'samti kadchod shimshotayich, and I'm going to use chadkod, which is another precious gemstone. The Radak says it's novech, which is a black pearl. In the Gemara in Bava Basra and Ayin Hey with Aleph, it says it's either Shoham or Yishbe, onyx or jasper. I know what onyx is. It's black. I don't know what jasper is, but I'm sure it's a beautiful gemstone as well. Okay. Shimshotayich, most of the Meforshim say, I'm going to put around your windows or in your windows, the Shimshotayich, the place where you get the sun in. It could be the things that you use, your utensils also. And your gates are going to be with avnei ekdach. Avnei ekdach, says the Radak, it's a gemstone that appears as if it's a flame. It's some kind of, it has this look to it of fire. V'chol gvulech lavnei chefetz. And all of your boundaries. Now, gvulech doesn't mean boundary on a map where they would have, and I'm trying to remember what the word is in English. They would place stones where the boundary of their property, and they would have stones around the boundary of the property. We still have it in some places. And Steve will remember what it's called. So those boundary stones will be desirable stones as well. Will be all made out of precious stone. In other words, this is a woman, the Oniyah Sarah was a woman who couldn't find her place. Well, let me tell you about your place I'm going to give you. It's going to be the most magnificent place that is made out of the most magnificent materials. And let me tell you about the family you're going to have. And this pasuk we know, V'chol banayich limudei Hashem. All of your children, all of your offspring will be limudei Hashem, will be melumadim, says Rashi, will be educated, will be knowledgeable in how to walk in the ways of God. Okay, that the Mitzudat David takes it a step further. They'll be so knowledgeable in the ways of Torah, it will seem as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was their teacher. They will be like this. Or that they have accepted the teachings of God to such an extent, which says the Malbim, V'rav Shalom Banayich, that the peace between your children, because they are so well versed in the ways of God, is going to be great. The Rav Shalom can be either they will make, Vayir says the Radak, or it could be a Harbez, says the Mitzudat David. There will be great peace among the Jewish people, or the Jewish people will bring peace. Now, if you remember, we talk about Altikra Banayach Ela Bonayach, which we have in the davening, call them the builders. Your children, the ones you had been in Akaram, you had been in Almanah, you had been in Azuvah, you had been in Aniyah, all of these things you had been. Now you have a place. That place could be the Beit HaMikdash we're describing. It could be the land of Israel. It could be Yerushalayim in general. You have a place. You will have children. Bitzdaka tekonani, and with justice you will be established. Rachaki me'osha kilo tirai, and distance yourself from any kind of injustice that exists in the world. Okay, rachaki in this case is a tzivui. Okay, this is a command. Avoid any kind of injustice. Not just that you will have justice, you have to push yourself away from justice. Because there's no reason to be afraid. And there's no reason to be in fear. Mechita from the word techat, for example, okay, where it's tsar or shevet, because this key again is powerful, is one for chizuk. Kilo tikrav elayach. They're not gonna get to you. No longer will you have anything to be afraid of. So if you have nothing to be afraid of, don't try to take shortcuts. Do the right thing always, says the Navi. Hein gor yagur efes mioti. Now, what is gor yagur efes mioti? Rashi says, whatever is efes mioti, whatever is not from me, says God, then gor yagur, be afraid of it. In other words, the only thing you have is be faithful within to me. The Ibn Ezra says, according to Rabbi Yonah ibn Shanach, gor yagur, he explains, comes from the phrase l'chaber, to be together. And the way he explains what this phrase means, the only people you should be together with are the ones who I'm telling you to be together with. Or to be even more specific in this case, he says, if you don't have permission to be with me, there's nothing to be afraid. Now, if you don't have permission to be with me, what's he's talking about? Says the Ibn Ezra and other Meforshim was talking about Gog and Magog. There's going to be this Armageddon that's going to occur. The nations of the world are going to team up against one another. Don't worry, they're doing it on their own. There's nothing for the Jewish people to be afraid of this. Mi gari tach alayich yipol. Anyone who comes up against you, says Rashi, he's going to be defeated. He will fall down. Hein anochi barati charash nofach ba'esh pecha umotzi kli l'ma'aseu. Listen, let's be upfront. And this hein is actually should be read hine. Behold, I'm the one, says God, who created the craftsmen who work in the charcoal fires, the ones who are the smiths, I created. The ones who bring about the utensils, the weapons of war. Vanochi barati mashchit lechabel. And I have also created those destroyers who create the terror. I've done it. It's all from God. In other words, this is an introduction, says Shadal, to what's going to be in the next pasuk. Both, as the Barbanel says, both the cheresh and the mashchit, both the craftsman or the smith and the destroyer, all of them, kulam, says the Barbanel, shluchei hashgacha, all of them come from God. And since they all come from God, kol kli yutzar alayich lo yutzlach. Anything that's been created that they try to use against you will not succeed. V'cholashon takumi tach lemishpat tarshi. And any tongue, any claims against you in court will not find you guilty. Now, Rav Schwab has a piece on this that is brilliant. And yes, I disagree with him. All right, would like to expand it. I don't have to describe I don't disagree with Rav Schwab. He says there's two things being described here. God is saying you have nothing to fear from two things. One is from armies. Nothing to fear from armies because God is in charge. The time of the Geulah, you will be redeemed and no one will be able to do anything for you. The other is the mishpat, is this lashon. So Rav Schwab says it's talking about that there's no claim in the heavenly court that will ever stand up against you. And I think that this could also refer to there's no claim in the earthly courts that can ever stand up against you. Think ICC. Think the ICC. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is promising us two things. The time of the Geulah, we will be saved from the armies. We will be saved from the armies. And we'll be saved from the courts. I think we can look in these words and see it pretty simply because when it says save, right, Rav Schwab didn't have the paper. When it says here, in other words, that the kli yutzar alayich lo yitzlach, it's talking about the earthly, the human weapons. So why can't these be human courts as well? I'm just suggesting it on that perspective. Zot nachalat of the this is the inheritance of those who are the portion. This is the inheritance of those who are the servants of God. And their tzedakah will come from me. The righteousness will come from me, says God. Says in Tzudat David, this is the bracha. This is both a bracha to those who follow, who serve God, and this is the tzedakah, which will come to them as well. There's both a bracha, and because we are Avdei Hashem, and there's a tzedakah, there's an element that God is going to give us above and beyond. Now, it's interesting that the Eved Hashem, if you remember the Avdei Hashem, Eved Hashem is the moniker that was used for Moshe Rabbeinu. The description of Moshe Rabbeinu was the Eved Hashem, the servant of God. I don't know if you know, when Rav Lichtenstein passed away, the children were arguing over what should be on his matzeva. And there were two schools of thought. One school of thought would just be something very simple, which he wanted was, he didn't want Eved Hashem. He said that would be too pretentious of himself to use the same terminology as Moshe Rabbeinu. So on his matzeva it says Oved Hashem, the one who serves God. But other children said we can't have it so simple for such a great person, so they added at the bottom of pasuk as well. But the Eved Hashem, this is the ultimate of what we try to do. So when we're Avdei Hashem, we get all of this gula comes to us. It's just an amazing thing that happens for us. And then Hashem, and then it goes one step further, that it comes to the element of tzedek as well. We're going to stop. We stop here with this parak. It's a beautiful parak, and next week we'll be picking up on parak Nun Hey, and we will continue. And as we know, we're almost done with Sefer Yeshayahu.